I've been going to China for many years, teaching students how to design and how to think like a designer. And 10 years ago, I remember speaking to students and hearing often, I've done this, but how do I make sure it looks Chinese enough? Because they were anxious to make sure that they preserve their identity in their collection. And I would invariably say to them then, as I say now, look around you. Look at how many people are wearing traditional Chinese clothing with Chinese symbols on it to prove that they're Chinese. The answer is very few, particularly in the middle of cities. And so I ask the same question now. When people are creating a collection and they worry about if it looks Chinese enough, how many people dress intentionally to look Chinese? You know, it's like me dressing intentionally to make sure everyone knows I'm English. I don't need to do that because I already am English. It doesn't matter what I try to do, I am. And the same I think is true of Chinese designers. They are already Chinese. They don't need to prove that they're Chinese, and they don't need to use overt Chinese symbolism or designs to prove that either. They're brilliantly capable of designing anything they want, and indeed the customers, the Chinese people, will buy whatever they like, regardless of whether it looks Chinese or not. Well, I think the first thing that Chinese designers have to decide is, do you want to be international? Because there's a tendency, China is a huge market and many designers have been very, very successful inside that market. So they've been 100% focused on the amazing success they've achieved in China. So if they therefore want to become international, they have to start thinking slightly differently, because the rest of the world doesn't consume in the way that China does, any more than Chinese people consume in the way that Americans do. You know, it's a normal, logical thing. Too often, I think, Chinese designers and indeed Chinese companies assume that the massive success they've had in China will simply extend internationally, when in fact it won't. And I think the same is true. I used to work for Nike, and when I worked for Nike, I was in charge of Asia Pacific design. And we had to modify the Nike product to make it appropriate for China. You know, you might think Nike is Nike anywhere in the world, but it's not. It needs to be appropriate for the market you're going into. So going to the question, and Chinese designers who have some success in China and they want to be successful in New York Fashion Week, the first thing they've got to do is start behaving like an international brand. And that means accepting that some things are very Chinese and some things are very international. And you have to accept that you're trying to operate in an international marketplace. Made in China used to be a negative connotation. It used to imply, well, in the same way that made in France or made in Italy was meant to signify luxury, then made in China was to signify mass production, shall we say. I feel like we've moved on a bit from there. Yeah, not completely. I mean, a lot of very low quality product is made in China. It is. It's also made in other parts of the world. So we can't deny that. But I think also we've moved on from the stereotype that it is therefore of some sort of lower quality. I've no doubt that our iPhones are all made in China, and no one denies the quality of an iPhone. So I think it's very easy to point to like the highest quality products that are made in China. In the fashion business, when you look at Guo Pei or Lawrence Shu or Tare Wang, these are very, very high quality products and they're made in China. And I think people only need to see them to realize that real quality is happening there. There's a little, well, not controversy, but there's differences of opinion on this. I happen to think that if you look at the dad sneakers, so those big Balenciaga and Gucci and everyone else doing those oversized sneakers, I think that's been influenced by the way that China dresses. 10 years ago when I would go to China, there was a less sophisticated way of putting together designers, whether it was taking a Vuitton jacket and putting it with a pair of Fei sneakers. And it wasn't quite, well, it was a bit too quirky. Whereas now, I think it's much more sophisticated. Now the fact that every Chinese person has a phone in their hand, they can see exactly what's going on around the world, so they know what looks cool. They're as smart as anybody else in the world, so they can put these things together. Perhaps they have more buying power than a lot of other parts of the world. So suddenly, the way that Chinese are dressing is more influential than it used to be. As a result, designers aren't blind, they're looking at this. And if people are looking cool in China and they're getting coverage online and in the sort of style press, That's what designers see. So if a designer's thinking, how do I put this together? And then suddenly there's a lot more Chinese influence than there was before, just subliminal. And so it can't help but have influence. For me, I would probably go along with the Chinese style of dressing having had a big influence on these big oversized sneakers that we're seeing right now. And that's just an obvious example. Plenty of other people have influenced this as well, but I don't think I could deny that the Chinese have had an influence. Well, I can't see any positive spin on this escalating conflict, and I wish it would go away. I wish Trump hadn't started this. I hope it draws to an end quickly, and I hope the negative impacts are reduced. My experience of it so far is it's going to hurt America more than it's going to hurt China. You know, America exports certain things to China, and if the cost of those goes up, then China's going to buy less. It's a simple reality. I don't think, I mean, my experience with working with some Chinese companies is their sourcing, where it was in America, they just move it. It's really not that big a deal. So it's really going to, I think it's going to hurt America more than it's going to hurt China, and I really just hope it will go away. I mean, nobody is feeling good about it. Nobody. No one in international business is feeling good. So designers are the same thing. You know, China is not yet a massive market for American designers. It will be when people like JD in business, and they're of course actively courting American designers. But if it becomes hard to do business, then there's plenty of Europeans they can work with instead. So sadly, it's not a positive thing, and all we really hope is that the damage is minimal and it goes away quickly. One of the things that I'm really passionate about when I'm in China, and actually one of the reasons I go there often, is for design thinking. It's something that in my mind has evolved over the past 10, 15 years through my career. It's something I originally wrote when I was at Parsons, when I became the dean. It's now become a blueprint for a better life. It's something that I feel I want to share with China, and yet some of it comes from Confucius. So it's original concepts from thousands of years ago, but I think brought up to date and put into a way that people can get their heads around in a very simple way. I'll give you an example of Confucius. And Confucius said something, and I won't quote it because I can't remember it exactly, but it was along the lines of, it's only by understanding that you know nothing that you can begin to learn. So it's very profound, you know, and entirely true. For me, what I translate that into is ask smart questions. So when I first used to go to China to teach, I would ask the class a question, and every single member of the class would go, because they've been taught, don't ask questions. Do not ask questions of the professor, that's not being respectful. Now, thankfully, that's changed. Maybe half of them will look up and then maybe I'll get some questions because they're really smart. But ultimately, I've had a career that's been very rewarding, and I've learned some interesting things along the way. I've always got more questions. I want to know the answers. It's my curiosity that drives me. And I think whatever success I've had is because of that, asking questions. Because you can't acquire knowledge to do better unless you ask questions. And it's against people's nature to do that. They think that they should appear to know what they're doing. They don't want to appear smart. Maybe they want to say something really clever. And it's the opposite. It's the opposite. You've got to accept that you don't know anything. Then you can ask smart questions. And the smarter the question, the cleverer you look. It's in some ways, to people, it's counterintuitive, but it's 100% the fact. So to me, that's from the Confucian saying. Well, in 10 years, it's impossible for me to imagine that we don't have global Chinese designers. I just can't imagine why. I do think that it won't be in the same way that we have them here. Like if you think about the typical American, English, Italian, French global designers, they have the same store in every city in the world. I don't know how many Vuitton stores there are, you know, hundreds and hundreds. They're all the same, largely. Same with Nike, same with Burberry, you know, all these other companies. And I think in some ways that's a very Western notion of global design. Then you look at Alibaba, and you look at JD.com, and you look at the other humongous retail sites, and you think, well, maybe there's a Chinese designer that won't have a single store. Maybe they'll be in every household in the land, because they'll just do it through online. And maybe that's the Chinese model for a global brand. You know, I don't know. I have a feeling, a strong feeling, that the Chinese global brands that we will see, and I'm confident that we will, but they will not be in the same mold as what we're currently doing from the West. And that's what excites me. That's why I like to be there. There needs to be a Chinese success story that mirrors the effect that that has on Westerners like me. And I know there will be one. You know, I'm there trying to help people to achieve that, because I think that the more we in the West can learn about China, the better friends we can become, and the better that is for everybody.